Hello and welcome to another exciting day of animal music. Wait, another exciting day? Did I miss a week? Hey, come on guys, not funny at all. That's right. It's time for Bat Music with me, your host, Dr. David M. Bashwinner, or, that's right, Associate Professor of Music at the University of New Mexico. And today we are going to talk about the music of these little creatures at the bottom of the screen. Don't be afraid, they don't die. They're bats. So, little overview. What's a bat? Then we talk about bat sounds, echolocation, little communication, and then song. Bats sing? Yeah. And then some final things, which we don't actually talk about, but what you'll be looking at in your readings for the week, and a little journal entry, is what is it like to be a bat? We will talk a bit about whether bat songs are music, and some things you've been thinking about are, do bats have emotional lives and subjective experiences? And is it even possible for us to know this? So let us start with the evolution of mammals. From a long time ago, you've seen this little diagram before. The amniotes that gave rise to the sauropsids, and those gave us all our reptiles, and then the birds were in there among the reptiles, as we know. But this week, we will be looking at the different branch from the amniotes, the synapsids, and the synapsids become mammals. So mammals are amniotes, along with reptiles and birds. And you might remember this little picture at the top right of the screen. This means that the amniote thing means that these animals developed a fancy egg sac, the amniotic sac, that allowed them to lay their eggs on the land, right? So they didn't have to lay them in the water like amphibians and fish, or they didn't even have to lay the eggs. They could just keep them in their bodies, like the mammals. So amniotes divided into two groups around 300 million years ago. And the sauropsids, as we saw, became reptiles and birds. The synapsids became us, mammals. And the road from synapsid to mammal was, however, not as straightforward as the picture makes it look, so let's just dig in a little bit. How did we get from looking like this, little green thing, to looking like this, rats? Not that any of you specifically look like rats. I didn't really think of that when I was presenting this. If you're offended by that, that's okay. I apologize. Anyway, I don't know. I think rats are good looking. That guy is especially. It's a good looking rat. Anyway, as you're going to see in a second, that wasn't even a rat. So let's look at the evolution of mammals from synapsids to mammals. So of course you have amniotes, and amniotes go to synapsids around 320 million years ago. And then, there's this group, Cassiids. But anyway, sort of an off group, but the remainder of the synapsids go to the eupelicosaurs, and those are sometimes just called pelicosaurs. Cassiids, not super important, but they were like also synapsids, but then they diverged from the pelicosaurs, and then they died out. So this Archaeotheris is reconstructed from a fossil from about 315 million years ago. That was a pelicosaur. So we can see what happens after that guy, or girl, whichever it may be. So the pelicosaurs divide into two groups. I really should have practiced saying these things. The adaphosaurids and the sphenocodontians. And we have a sphenocodont on the left here, Dimetrodon homogenes. Hello, Dimetrodon homogenes, from about 300 million years ago. So it's, this is just like one of the animals is what our ancestors might have looked like, or they were closely related to them. So these guys still look like, well, looks like a reptile. Looks like a dinosaur. The guy before that looks like a reptile. By the way, those big fins that they have on the back were probably for heat exchange. Isn't that interesting? Or oxygen, like for cooling themselves off. So yeah, the sphenocodontians, some of them branch off and die out, and they become the sphenocodontids. But the ones that survive are the therapsids. And we have an example of an early therapsid, Biarmosuchus, from 267 million years ago. And another one from the same time period here, Robertia. Robertia is a dicynodont. And these are just representative animals from the time both of those types of species died off, but they're probably representative they are representative of what therapsids were at around 275 million years ago. The ones that didn't die off became the theriodonts, and theriodonts then branch off into cynodonts and gorgonopsids. And then we have a little representative here of Gorgonops, which is an early theriodont. You can see it's sort of dog-like. By the way, I had a picture of Biarmosuchus that it showed him, like just a different picture, that did show him to be hairy. And so, it's possible that there's hairs on these animals already. And then we have Karasognathus, who was a cynodont from around this time. And you can see definitely has like little whiskers, maybe some teeth, fangs, kind of dog-like. Okay. And then, of course, there's the late Permian mass extinction at 252 million years ago. So anyone that's surviving past this point survived that big, huge mass extinction. There's a different mass extinction that we were talking about a little while ago with birds. That one is 66 million years ago, but this one is 252 million years ago. Okay, so then you have therocephalians that bridge off from the cynodonts. And this is an example here at the top, Scyllacosaur, therocephalian, 255 million years ago. It's also kind of doggy looking with a big crazy eye. Then you have the Probiognathians, and so these are our ancestors from this time. They branch off to become Tritylodonts, so this is one of the groups that branches off. And you can see they're definitely looking much more mammal-like and I guess less dog-like from before, and more like a little rat-like. This guy definitely looks like a little rat from 210 million years ago. And then, but Oligokephas, that you have there at the bottom, was not considered a mammalia form, right? But I mean, he's still, close within our line. But then you have mammalia forms, and then there's two examples of those, Morganocodon from 205 million years ago, and Cynoconodon, from 195 million years ago. That's the guy that looks like a little rat, but isn't a rat. Anyway, but that is what our ancestors probably looked like around 200 million years ago. And those guys branched off, and then everyone else that doesn't die off becomes a mammal. So that's what a mammal is. Or that is the pathway from a reptilian-like looking thing to a mammal-like looking thing. And, I probably should just say, I am a music theorist. I'm not... I don't have, great expertise in this, but this was my reconstruction based on Wikipedia and stuff like that. Okay, so now let's also look at, once you have mammals, how they all radiate, how they become all the different mammals that we know of today. Okay, 200 million years ago, we got the mammals. You get hair and fur apparently 165 million years ago, but as I said, some of those pictures had hair and fur in them, so it might have happened a little bit before that. Maybe it's just it's hair and fur by 165 million years ago. Okay, so around 125 million years ago, mammals branch off into these three groups. So the first one is the monotremes, which today still exist as platypuses and echidnas. And as we know, platypuses have beaks, and their eggs are still in their bodies. They're pretty distantly related to us. Marsupials branched off probably right around the same time. We're not exactly sure, or I'm not exactly sure. And the kangaroos, koalas, opossums, right? They lay their young very young, and then they keep them in their little pouches on the outside of their bodies. And then the placentals are all the other mammals. So placentals are around from around 72 million years ago. So this is getting pretty close. Not that long ago, right? Oh, we got that mass extinction coming up at 66 million years. What's going to happen? Well, the one thing we know is placentals do survive, and then they radiate into a bunch of different species, meaning they just become massively more populous because there's no huge predators around anymore. So they grow into three groups. One of them is the Afrotheria, and these are elephants, manatees, elephant shrews, aardvarks. Another group called the Boreoeutheria, and we're going to come back to those in a second. But then one other group, the Xenarthra, armadillos, anteater sloths. Everything else is in this middle group, the Boreoeutheria. So this would be, I think we can call this the main group. And the Boreoeutheria diverge into two groups, the Archontoglyres, which include tree shrews. There's a little picture of one. Primates, I'm one. You guys probably are too. Rabbits and rodents. So yeah, primates and rodents, pretty closely related. And then the other group of the Boreoeutheria are all the other mammals. So that group is called the Laurasiatheria. And that includes whales, which we'll be talking about next week, bats, which we're talking about this week, dogs. I've got one around here hanging out with me. Oh, yeah, he's over there to the right. Hey, it's a sheep, but whatever. Cats, seals, we'll talk about next week also, and ungulates. Ungulates are the ones that have like funky toes, meaning sometimes, well, anyway, horses, goats, all that. Those guys are ungulates. Okay, so a little focus on bats today. I know. What is a bat, right? That's from Ernst Haeckel from 1904. Very nice pictures. Okay, a Townsend big-eared bat. I just looked it up this morning, and it turns out it lives in New Mexico with us. Okay, anyway, some bat facts. Bats are the only flying mammals. You might not have known that because you probably think about flying squirrels, but flying squirrels really just glide. There's 1,400 species of bats. Some of them can fly up to 100 miles per hour, and one of them is called the Mexican free-tailed bat. It's kind of the same subspecies, or same species as the Brazilian free-tailed bat. We'll be talking about that later. And those are around here, definitely. So if you see something flying around at 100 miles per hour, and it's little, it's not an airplane, it's probably a bat. Their heart rates can go up to 100 beats per minute. So ours go between 60 and 100 beats per minute. So they can go up to like more than 10 times the rate of our natural heart rates. Okay, so are bats just clumsy wannabe birds? They do fly weird, right? This is the most cool thing, is that their wings are on their hands rather than on their arms. So with chickens, maybe I'm going to let you do a little demonstration for you. So, can you guys see me? Well, I can't see you seeing me, but I'm going to guess. Okay, so here's how chickens fly. I know that you probably know that because you know the chicken dance, right? But it's really true. So, like, they use that part of the body. And I actually don't know what's going on with their fingers, but I don't think they don't have much going on up there. Anyway, bats are different from that. Their wings are like structured with their fingers going through them, as we'll see on the next screen. So bats are flying with their hands, whereas birds are flying with their wings. And then the other cool thing about bats is so you got this big, huge, long fingers, but then the skin connects all the way down to the legs. So the hands go out like that, but then they have these big, anyway, you'll see. I mean, unless you just stop watching the video now because you don't want to see. Which I understand. The wings of bats are much thinner, really fine membrane, with more bones. So, I mean, I now need to go back and look at chicken wings to see what they look like. I mean, they obviously have bones on the outside, but not really like on the inside. Not the finger bones that bats have. So the bat wings also have muscles in them, so that, that tissue has muscles in it, so it keeps it taut, and they're just like extremely dexterous. So I used to think bats were clumsy wannabe birds, but I think now that they are just they operate at such a much faster rate than we do. And we'll see that with their vocalizations too. They're faster even than birds, like many octaves faster in terms of how they vocalize. That I think they're just flying really, 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 really fast. And it's so fast that we process it as chaotic and clumsy, but it's not. Okay, they can't travel long distances like birds can, and they can't, for the most part, take off from the ground. So they often have to climb up a tree and then glide down from there. So now this myth, some call it slander, animal slander, about bats being blind. Anybody think that's true? It's not true. Bats are not blind. Fruit bats, especially, have very good vision. The bats that use echolocation and fly around at night and don't need to see colors, those guys might have less good vision than fruit bats, but even those guys have pretty good vision. So, one thing to think about is you have your rods and your cones, and they do different things. Cones give you colors, your rods give you black and white, so rods are better in low light conditions. But also, at least with us, we have our cones at the center of the fovea, but we can't sense motion very well in the fovea of the eye with the cones. We sense motion best on the peripheries with the rods, which also detect dark light contrasts. So if you're a daytime animal that's looking around for fruit, you probably want really good color vision, and fruit bats really have that. And then if you are a nighttime animal that needs really subtle detection of contrasts and motion, you want more rods. Anyway, bats, not blind. So are bat vocalizations only used in echolocation? We know that bats use their voices to echolocate, but it turns out that the answer is no, of course not. Bats also like to complain. I don't know if you've ever heard them doing this, but they like to squabble over food. I believe this is a direct quote from Wikipedia, anyway. Okay, it's a direct quote from somewhere. They like to squabble over food. They like to jostle over position in their sleeping cluster. They vocalize in order to protest over mating attempts and to argue when perched in close proximity to each other. Sort of like roll over, said the one little sheep to the other one, or bat. Okay. Yeah, but is it music when bats vocalize? Do bats sing? Are their songs flexible? Are their songs learned or innate? Then that's questions we'll address. So now, finally, I added this in. Do bats give us the coronavirus? Because bats got a lot of bad press early on in the whole pandemic thing. The answer is almost certainly no. I don't mean like it's like absolutely not. It's not certainly no. But as far as I can tell, it's almost certainly no, meaning bats probably did not give us the coronavirus. So bats generally very low risk to humans, and they're super, super critical to the ecosystem. So people go around saying nasty things about bats are thinking them, which is fine. But the more research I've been doing on this for this presentation, I realize, they're just super critical. So here is an example. Bats control insect populations far better than millions of tons of pesticides could ever do. So I think one bat can eat like 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour. It might even be 10,000. I mean, it's like a lot of mosquitoes in an hour. And bats eat insects of all kinds. So, if you make a pesticide that gets rid of insects, you obviously are hurting the entire ecosystem, putting poisons in, hurting us. And then also the insects just kind of adapt quickly to not be poisoned by that poison, but we're still poisoned by it. Whereas you could just have more bats and the bats will eat them. So people are often going around killing bats and thinking that bats bring disease and stuff like that, but it turns out that's not really true. And so bats are obviously much healthier for the environment. I think I might build a little bat house on my property to welcome some bats. And then the one last thing about this, so I was listening to an interview on the Ologies podcast with Merlin Tuttle, who's a batologist, chiraptologist. Anyway, so he says like 1.5 people per year get rabies from bats. So that's not many people at all, 1.5. And yet people are always afraid that you can get rabies from bats. So he says that's obviously not something to be afraid of. And humans are apparently much, much, much more, other humans are way more dangerous to one another than bats, even just like for disease. It's hard to get a disease from a bat. It's very easy to get a disease from another human because that disease works in humans. And then he also gave this example of like, your chances of getting killed by a bat are like, infinitesimally small, whereas your chances of getting killed by your spouse are, sorry, it's not something to laugh about, but like they're actually enormous in comparison. And we go around saying like, oh, I love my spouse, right? And we sometimes say like, bats, keep away. But so you if you find yourself loving bats, you should just feel like you are every bit as much allowed to love your bats as anyone would be to love their spouse. And maybe even more so. Okay, here's a picture of a bat. In case you couldn't tell. That guy is the thumb. Isn't that awesome? That's his index finger, or her. Not the middle finger, ring finger, pinky. I've never written pinky before. I hope I spelled it right. And then that's the little elbow, so you can see the arm there. And you can see the wing is also connected to the leg. And then there's a tail, and it looks like there's a tail pouch, and the bat often catches insects in the tail pouch, not in the mouth. Because if they caught the insect in the mouth, apparently they wouldn't be able to screech anymore as they're flying and eating the insect. And then they would run into things. Not because they're blind, just because it's dark out. All right, let's talk about some bat evolution. The earliest bats were found around 52 million years ago. You can see one to the upper right. That is not an actual specimen. It's a picture of one. And it, of course, is not a photograph. It's a drawn picture, but still looks pretty bat-like. So, they would have had ancestors that we said they were close to whales. It probably didn't look like a whale or a porpoise. But anyway, it would have looked like a more general mammal. It starts to look like bats around 52 million years ago. What is a bat? We kind of talked about this. Bats look like flying rodents. And so, it looks like a rat or a mouse, but they're not really closely related to rodents, as we saw in a couple screens ago. Bats were previously classified with rodents and primates among the Euarchontoglires. So bats were originally over at the top left of the diagram, not the top right. But we now know that they are to be placed among the Lorasiatheria, with the carnivores, like dogs and cats, ungulates, sheep, horses, etc., and cetaceans, whales, and dolphins, that we'll be talking about next week. So when we're trying to figure out what this guy might have looked like before 52 million years ago, what his ancestors would have looked like, I don't know, maybe something like dog-cat-like, sort of my guess. Okay, so now here's a really cool question to ask. So bats can fly, right? They're the only mammals that can fly, and they also echolocate. Did those things come at the same time? Did flying come first? Did echolocation come first? If you would like, you could pause right now and think about this. Are you back? I've actually been here the whole time, but anyway. Flight, it turns out, evolved before echolocation. And I can't remember how they figured that out, but oh yeah, I know how they figure it out. So they'll look at a fossil for a bat with wings that's clearly able to fly, and then they look, I don't know how they can see how big certain brain areas are, but they can. It's called anyway, they look at endocasts, whatever those are. And they can figure out that the cochlear nucleus for auditory processing was not really all that much bigger in that ancestor. So presumably the flying came before the better hearing that you would need for echolocation. Okay, so then how did flying evolve? So with birds, they talk about this, and sometimes, one of the theories is they dropped down from trees. They would glide at first, and then they eventually got better at flapping their wings. Or another one is they were really fast runners, and then they developed wings to sort of take off from the ground. So that's kind of like the top down and bottom up theories. And anyway, in bats, it appears that they did it from the top down. They began dropping down onto prey, and then they could probably get better at gliding, sort of like with flying squirrels. And then, eventually they develop wing type things and can actually fly. So then we can next ask, how did echolocation evolve? And this is cool for our question about animal music, right? Because we're asking two questions. One of them is like, how did the vocalizations, the sort of like bat music that they produce, how did that evolve? But then also, how did their hearing evolve to be able to hear those vocalizations and vice versa, right? So it's a very cool question that you kind of have to approach from multiple angles. So there's two aspects: the ability to hear ultrasound, and that just means above what humans can hear, so above 20,000 hertz, and the ability to echolocate based on producing ultrasonic vocalizations. So you might be saying, why ultrasound? And I think I answered that here. No, I do it on the later screen, next screen. So the ability to detect ultrasound probably came first. So meaning they weren't yet vocalizing really, really, really high-pitched sound. They first became able to hear it. And that's probably possibly for communication, but also possibly for eavesdropping on insects. So if insects are making sounds in the ultrasonic range and bats develop the hearing to be able to hear that, then they can find those insects. That's not echolocation yet. That's the sound that the insect is making. But then the bats can then communicate in that range since they have hearing up there. And of course, other predators that don't hear ultrasound cannot hear them. So if like owls like to eat bats and the owl can't hear ultrasound, the bat can speak as loud as it wants in ultrasound and the owl won't hear it, but it can communicate with its fellows and it can hear food like insects. Okay, so then once the bats are communicating on that channel that their predators can't hear, echolocation would probably come next. And so it would have been potentially on that scenario derived from the communication calls themselves. So, and then there's the distinction between megabats and microbats, and this isn't super crucial for you to know, but I'm just going to throw it in because it's one of the first things that comes up if you Wikipedia bat. Megabats, bigger than microbats. Mostly. There's some microbats that are bigger than some megabats, but whatever. Okay, they don't echolocate. There's one species of megabat that does, and that, interestingly, I wanted to check it out, but it uses clicks. So if you think about whales and dolphins, or at least like humpback whales and certain types of dolphins. Dolphins tend to use clicks. Whales, at least humpback whales, use like less than. But so bats tend to use pitched type sounds, but this rosetus megabat that evolved echolocation separately, probably. Yeah, does it in a different way. So I think that would be something interesting to follow up on. The megabats, these much bigger bats that don't echolocate, eat fruit, nectar, and pollen. So they're not insectivores. They're not going chasing prey, and that's probably why they don't have to echolocate, because their prey's not running away from them. They don't have to do it at night. They do it during the day. Okay, microbats, in comparison, usually smaller, they do echolocate, and they're carnivores. They eat insects, pollen. I know pollen is not, well, anyway. Insects, pollen, frogs, small mammals, and blood, as well as fruit and nectar, and even more pollen. So they're omnivores to the extent that they're eating fruit and nectar and pollen too, but they're carnivorous in they have to chase down their prey and get it. And that the one case where they don't have to chase it is the vampire bat, and the vampire bat just like sucks blood from living animals. Apparently, like if you're afraid of vampire bats, don't be afraid. They never really do that to humans, just like cows. And now we have a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor today is echolocation, TM, a how-to guide for the aspiring hand-flapping moth-eater. Do you want to use your voice to avoid obstacles and catch prey, and catch prey? Do you want to use your ears to see in the dark? You shall try echolocation. All you need is a high-pitched voice and a pair of fuzzy ears. Why high pitch? Well, low sounds have large wavelengths and only bounce back off of large objects. So, unless you plan to eat a buffalo or a semi-truck, you got to get squeaky. We recommend vocalizations between 14,000 and 10,000 and 100,000 hertz. The higher the sound you make, the smaller its wavelength, and therefore the finer the grain of detail returned to you in the form of an echo. Echo is being trademarked by our company. Note that higher sounds do not travel as fast as lower sounds. So you may need to be within 3 meters of your prey for our product to work as advertised. We would also like to mention that outgoing signals directed through the nose can be amplified through our attractive nose leaves, which you see in the picture to the right. Little ear-like things on front of the nostrils that amplify and direct the sound. These are sold separately, of course, for a lot of money. Does this mean I will receive echoes during echolocation? Yes, it does. In fact, you already receive echoes all the time, but currently you may be ignoring these echoes rather than using them to your advantage. Echolocation teaches you to produce a sound based on the type of echo you want to hear, and then how to listen for exactly that echo. By listening to the sound you hear returning to you, you can determine not only that an object, such as a tasty insect, is nearby, but also what texture the object is and how fast it is moving. All that with a squeaky voice and a furry pair of ears. But how does it work? Why can't I just sing however I like? La la la. Well, if you just want to sing, go ahead. But if you want to sing for your dinner, you need to do it right. The kind of note you sing determines the kind of information you receive as feedback from your intended tasty audience. If you produce very short pulses of sound, tick, 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 you can listen for the timing of each echo, tick, echo, tick, echo, tick, echo, between the pulses. This tells you how far away your audience is. So, as you get closer, tick, echo, tick, echo, tick, echo, tick, echo, tick, echo. Yeah. As you get closer, the echo comes more quickly. Hey, I'm shooting a commercial over here. Quiet. Sorry. I don't know how to stop them. All right. If you produce a longer, more continuous sound, you will be singing at the same time that your echo is being returned to you. But do not worry. As long as you keep the note you are singing constant, la, you can... Sorry, the dog's just... Okay. But don't worry, as long as you keep the note you're singing constant, you can compare the pitch of the returning echo with the pitch of the note you originally sang. La, which you're still singing, right? Right, I am. And this will tell you how fast your little intended tasty audience is flying away from you relative to your own speed of approach. This is because as you approach your echo, you progress through its waves at a faster rate than they would wash over you if you were stationary. And this effectively raises their frequency. And I calculated the amount that it does this, and it appears to do it by about half a semitone, so a quarter tone. And that's something that you could certainly hear. Let's say you and your friend are playing violins with each other, and one of you, and you're holding a long note, and one of you is a quarter tone off. You would certainly hear that. So you might be asking yourself, yes, but can bats sing? Well, we're going to tell you about the Brazilian free-tailed bat, Tadarida brasiliensis, and then also just pretty much one line about the greater white-lined bat, but it's kind of an important line. And the Brazilian free-tailed bat, you will see here, is the same as the Mexican free-tailed bat. And it's the same species. It's just that they're different subspecies. And so Mexican free-tailed, I have found this article about the Brazilian free-tailed bat, but the Mexican free-tailed bat lives nearer to us. It, in fact, lives here in Albuquerque and also in Austin, Texas. There's a big cave called Bracken Cave, has a bunch of these bats. And you can see it on the upper right there. It's got some interesting, like, face wrinkles. I can't remember what exactly those were for. They're obviously for something. So, this animal, as I mentioned, lives here in the southern U.S. with us, and it goes all the way down to much of South America. Interestingly, it doesn't live in. If you look at the map of Brazil, it's only in a little part of Brazil, but it really does go down south almost to more than halfway down Chile. And there's a huge colony at Bracken Cave in San Antonio, Texas, right nearby to us. So these guys are insectivores. They eat moths, beetles, dragonflies, flies, bugs, wasps, ants. How do they do that? They obviously have to echolocate. So they hunt at night, they leave the cave at around sunset and return at around sunrise, like a vampire. They fly the highest altitude of all bats, these guys do, and these are the ones that fly 100 miles per hour at ground speed. So I had to look up what ground speed is, and ground speed means horizontally. So it's not like they get up really high and then they just drop down very quickly, from left to right across the sky. They can fly at 100 miles per hour, so pretty darn fast. Echolocation is what they use for navigating and catching prey mid-flight. They have something like a travel call, and that's not a term that I'm going to be using anymore, but this is just what I found in the reading I was looking at. The travel call is a brief constant frequency, so that's the one, sort of like that in the previous page. And then they have a modulated frequency call. Yeah. FM just means frequency modulation, and in this case, it's not a up and down. It's not periodic frequency modulation. It's just one swooping glissando in the range of 40 to 75 kilohertz. The way that they communicate with each other is they have 15 different varieties of social call. When we looked at the zebrafinch, we saw at least 8 or so. So that's sort of, in the same range, the number of social calls that they make. They are able to adjust those calls to avoid interfering with others when they're flying. So that is pretty interesting, right? Because they see with their voices. So if someone's talking really loud on their cell phone while you're trying to not run into a wall or to catch an insect, that could be annoying to you. So, but they do, and when we're talking about sort of how intelligent they are, or what kind of vocal system they have, we ask ourselves how flexible are their vocalizations. And so we do know that they're flexible enough that they can not get in the way of one another vocally while they're trying to do all the work of echolocating. Okay, and then I do know a lot of you are here just to hear about the sex lives of the animals that we discuss here, and that's perfectly okay. Sex is great. It's important. Okay, so these bats, you may be interested here, are rather promiscuous, Both the males and the females have multiple partners. So sometimes males have territories, and then they aggressively keep away other males with their vocalizations, their songs, and their flight displays. And then females in this species, and actually in most bat species, produce only one baby a year, one pup. They only have one estrus cycle, and it lasts 5 weeks in the spring. And then females identify their pups through the pup's vocalizations and then the scent of the pup, but the mother also rubs her scent all over the pup and doesn't let it go after it's born until they have sort of like learned each other. I think they're still attached by the umbilical cord. And then the mother takes care of her pups for between 4 and 7 weeks. And then the fathers, I think in some bat species, maybe the fathers do take care of the infants, but in this bat species, at least, in many bat species, it's only the mother that takes care. And then there's apparently a lot of altruism in bats, so that any old female bat might take care of any old infant bat. They don't really care. And then males in the species establish territories, and they allow females to come in, but they try to keep out other males of their little territories. And then they sing a song, which is what we're going to talk about, when either a male comes near them, so then they're being territorial, or when the female approaches and then the male is like, hey, welcome to my territory. The song seems to function in the same way, and maybe they sing slightly different songs. We see a little tiny bit of that in a bit. But let's now look at the structure of the song. We're going to see some syllables might be directed more at other males, such as the buzz. So here's a normal speed version of a little Brazilian free-tailed bat. Okay. Oh, isn't he so cute? Do we want to see that again? I think we do. So I think that is his song display, and then we're going to see it slowed down on the next screen. Just a little tiny portion of it, just the part that is the song that's slowed down. So when you hear that, so it's slowed down. I think that's probably slowed down 8 times. That drops the pitch, and it also slows it. So it does both of those things at the same time, and that puts it in our range of hearing. To me, that sounds like bird vocalizations, like that's the range of bird calls. And then birds, you slow down about 8 times, maybe less, and they are about in the range of human vocalizations. And then, as we're going to see next week, if you take whale song, like humpback whale song at least, and you speed that up about 8 times, it's sort of in the range of human speech again. And if you speed it up, or maybe 4 times, you get humans, and then another 4 times you get birds. I can't believe that fact, but it's shocking. And it was only like 3 days ago when I saw these videos that I realized, oh, bats are like sped up birds. And I still can't really believe it. We might get this one more time. Normal speed, dance. Okay, then slow speed. Okay, so there's actually structure in that song, and let's take a look at what this is. By the way, all this stuff comes from this article by Bonnet et al., Versatility and Stereotypy in the Free-Tailed Bat Songs. This article was just awesome, and I got all those video files and the sound files from them as well. Okay, so the aim of their study was to examine song similarity between 2 regions and between individuals within one region. So this is similar to what you might do if you were going to compare musical styles in, so popular music, think like pop music or folk music, in 2 different parts of the world, like the US and India, or the US and Africa, or parts of Africa, or the US and the Middle East, or China. Okay, or 2 different regions of the US, so West Coast and East Coast, or 2 bands in the same region, like 2 different bands from Seattle in the 90s, or 2 different songs from the same band, so 2 different songs by Nirvana, how different are they from one another, or 2 different parts of the same song, so like in Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, if you did the verse where the guitar is like really it just goes right? Just plays two notes over, and as the bass or drum. Yeah. Anyway, but then in the chorus, the guitar is obviously very crunchy and distorted and stuff like that, and you could compare what the voice is doing. Da 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 dum. In the verse, verses la la la. So it probably goes up. It might be more dense as well. Might be more growly. Might be louder. Okay. So those are sort of like you can think of those as concentric circles of comparison, and all those kinds of comparison are interesting. So these authors are doing that. They're with the bats, they're going to look at these two different regions. One of them is in Austin at the Bracken Cave, and one of them is at College Station, some other part of Texas. I'm not sure where that is. But it's the same species of bat. So two different regions. But then they're also looking at different male singers within any one of those regions and asking, like, all the songs that you find in one region, are they similar or different to all the songs you find in the other region? And then is there, for any one individual male singer, does he have a whole bunch of songs or does he always sing sort of like one type? So, similarly, we could ask, if we're looking at all the bands in Seattle, is it that all the songs of Nirvana sound alike and all the sounds of Pearl Jam in the 90s sound alike? Or is it like some songs of Nirvana's are kind of slow ones that sound like the slow ones from Pearl Jam, and some songs of Nirvana are upbeat, fast ones that sound like the upbeat, fast ones of Pearl Jam? Bindings. This is what they found. That they found that the songs were similar across the regions. So they have the same 4 types of syllable, which we'll look at in a second, the same 3 types of phrase, the chirp, the trill, the buzz. And then so in terms of syllables, it's just that the chirp has 2 different syllables, A and B. So that's where your 4 syllables are. So we're just going to be looking at chirps, trills, and buzz, basically. So in both regions, they have the same thing. So you could say with Nirvana and Pearl Jam, oh, that's different. We need different regions. We need, let's do like, anyway, you could probably extend the same, like they're playing with the same sorts of notes and chords, the same types of amplifiers and instruments and type of distortion. They're recording with the same techniques. You could look at those across bands, within bands, from one part of the country to another, and different styles of music as well. When I said East Coast, West Coast thing, right? Like if you did the comparison between rap music on either East Coast or West Coast in the 90s, or like hip hop, we'll call it, and the Seattle sound of grunge, you're going to get some like really huge differences in all those things I just mentioned. But if you look within hip hop, East Coast versus West Coast versus maybe like New Orleans type stuff, there's still going to be different, like regional differences, but then a lot of the things will be similar. And then, yeah, anyway, you can ask these questions with all the different types of concentric circles. So really super interesting questions. I'm so excited that I found this article where they did this with bats. Okay, so then within individual bats, they found this one. I'm not 100% sure if I got that right. I wish that they had talked more about this, but we're going to look at phrases, but I don't know if they were actually counting and comparing the number of syllables per phrase, but I thought I read that, so I wrote it down. But they definitely showed that different bats could have differences, or single bats could have differences in the number of phrases per song, differences in the order of the phrases per song. And so, in other words, individual bats have lots of different types of song that they're singing. And we're going to distinguish between types and variants, which we'll define eventually. And then, so if you're looking at phrase order in particular, they found that it's diverse. There's lots of different choices, but it isn't random. And this is very similar to what we saw with the Bengalese finch. So we come up with 3 names for phrases: the chirp, the trill, and the buzz. And what you have on the right is that static, steady state, finite state syntax thing. So it's like a static representation of something that happens in time, of the probabilities and likelihoods. So you can see that the plus signs means plus means super common, single plus means still very common. And then, so the size of the lines tells you how common it is. Basically, all phrases start with chirps. And then once you go to the chirp, you almost always go to the trill, but you can go to the buzz. And then once you go to the trill, you could repeat the trill. You could go back to the chirp. You might possibly go to the buzz. You might possibly end, but that doesn't usually happen. And then the only other thing that's really super common is that once you're on a buzz, you're pretty likely to keep buzzing. But the most likely thing to do, you're either going to keep buzzing, do more buzzes, or you're going to end. So that's our finite state diagram. We come back and look at that again at the end after we go in more detail here. Ooh, did you see? Did that just fly away? Okay, we're going to look at 4 different songs. So the first 2 are going to be from Austin at Bracken Cave. The second 2 are going to be from College Station. So just that different region. So 2 different cities, you can think. And then we're going to look at the song of one male first, and then a second male second, and then same thing for the other region. So the first one, Austin. Okay, so that's a song of Bat 1 from Austin. I'm going to play it again, and what you're going to see is that all these songs are of a certain type, which means that they do chirps first, and then trills second, and buzzes third. And it doesn't matter how many chirps they do in there for that particular distinction, or how many trills or how many buzzes. All these songs are going to be like that. Oh yeah, all these things have been slowed down 8 times. From now on, everything you listen to is slowed down 8 times. Okay, so I'm gonna now play you just another different bat from the same area. Another bat, this one is from College Station. And okay, so probably obvious, but the chirps are all in dashed squares. The trills are in circles, and the buzz are in solid squares. And all these are, they selected these all to be chirp, then trill, then buzz. But you can see there's difference in the number of chirps, the number of trills, and the number of buzzes across the different animals, across the different individuals. So let's just review this idea of what syntax is. Hierarchical syntactic structure. You should review the video on syntax and birdsong if you would like. In this case, I mean, the one thing that is important about that video to think about in the general scheme is like you can have complexity without hierarchy, right? But it's not super common. So basically, for systems to be complex, there has to be some sort of hierarchical structure. Otherwise, they don't usually evolve, and they don't usually stick around once they do evolve. So that's why we see in a bunch of different animal species that complexity tends to take on the form of sort of like hierarchical structures, ways of combining things, which we often use these terms, notes that combine into syllables, syllables into motifs, motifs into subphrases, subphrases into phrases, phrases into songs, right? That's like going to be different for different species and stuff like that. And people use those terms in different ways, but that's the general idea. Okay, and then the rules of combination, how you combine notes into syllables, how you combine syllables into motifs, etc., those things could be the same at each level, or they could differ. It could be like the way you combine motifs into subphrases is completely different from the way you combine subphrases into phrases. And an example from that, from English language, is the way you put words together into sentences is completely different from the way you put sentences together to form paragraphs. Okay, so syntax, like why it's interesting, especially interesting, is that it allows for creativity. If you have a syntactic combination system for your language or whatever, you can make an infinite number of utterances that are all still kind of like meaningful because they follow basic probabilities. So through recombination of individual elements, individual phonetic elements, phonetic just means sort of like sonic, and that's what Marler called phonocoding. Right? Through recombination of individual phonetic elements or phonocoding, a finite and often very limited number of elements can give rise to an infinitude of possible utterances. So in this bat we're looking at, it has 4 different types of syllable. That's like if we had only 4 letters in our language or 4 phonemes. But it can, with only 4 things, it can give rise to like an unlimited possible number of songs. And that is how language works with us, and that's how music works for us. And there's a lot of different birds also like that have only 4 things. So it's not impoverished to have only 4 things. There's a lot you can do with just 4. So this unlimited combinatoriality is usually not random. In the same way that you can't really have complexity without some sort of hierarchical organization, based on that video that I gave you before, it's also, that extends to this other level as well. It's like randomness is not super common, particularly like for brains to generate. Like if a human wants to generate something that's random, they have to use, a random number generator. They have to use something that's non-human. Humans can't really generate random stuff. And that's the same going to be with other animals too, because things are organized. It's like going into a library and saying, go grab random books. The only thing you could do is like make something pseudo-random, like say, okay, every aisle I go down, I'll choose like the 100th book from the bottom. Anyway, whatever. Okay, there are usually not equal likelihoods that any one element could proceed to or follow from any other element. There's going to be certain continuations or sequences that are going to be more or less likely than others. And listeners of all sorts internalize these probability structures and therefore can be more or less surprised by certain combinations. And they know this even from babies, like if you play babies, just sequences of random syllables or notes. If there's some structure in the way that those notes are played, the babies can figure out that structure within sometimes like half an hour. And it's super interesting, but that is a way that people learn even if you're not super conscious of it. Okay, and then this gives rise for the potential for meaning to occur. If you can be surprised by something, it can mean something. We're going to see that in about 2 weeks when we look at baboons. Because something captures your attention, it could implant a memory, right? We have that idea of tokens versus types. It can implant a token, which is a veridical utterance. Or it could just capture your attention through schematic violation. Okay, so in mammals, syntactic recombination, like we're seeing in this particular species of bat, not super common at all. Very few mammals are able to phonocode. Humans can obviously phonocode, right? We put phonemes together to create words. We put notes together to create new melodies. But that's not common in other species. Dolphins and whales can do it. Pinnipeds, so seals and porpoises, and maybe not sea lions, but the sea lions are in that group, and sea lions can like entrain to the beat. Sea lions can dance to the beat, basically. So I've thrown them in there as well. We'll talk about that next week. And then bats, at least the species of bats, and there's got to be more than just this species, but I don't know the extent of how many species of bats do this. And as someone might point out, lots of birds do phonocode, but not a lot of birds hang upside down. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so let's look at some strong structure in this free-tailed bat. Let's focus on the chirp first. The chirp has these 2 syllables, the A and the B, as you can see, because that little box there at the top is expanded. Let's give a listen to the chirp. So there's probably like a bunch of A's, 4 or 5 or 6 A's, and then a B. So all you need to see here is like they look different, the A's and the B's. Syllable A is very short, only 5 milliseconds. It's a downward FM sweep. It looks like there's 2 things there, but yes, that's the upper harmonic. So you really could just focus on the lower line here and then just recognize that it is a harmonic sound. So that means it's like a tone. But yeah, a very fast downward FM sweep. And we could even look at the bandwidth there. It's going from around, 35 kilohertz to 0. Okay, so yeah, 35 kilohertz to 20. Okay. Then syllable B over here, it actually looks like kind of the same range, but it's longer. It lasts 17 milliseconds instead of just 5. It's got a more complex contour. It doesn't just go down, it kind of goes up and then down and then even back up again. And then, so that's just one individual chirp is what you have here, but then this chirp phrase is just a series of chirps strung together. So putting A, together, this one thing is just a chirp. Then, and there could be many A's, up to 24. But then a chirp phrase is actually a set of chirps all together, and there could be up to 29 of those. So here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like 4 chirps in that phrase. So phrase is a bunch of chirps, and chirps are subdivisible into A's and B's. Okay, then that's just one single chirp. Let's listen again. Yep. Okay. Now let's listen to a trill. Okay. So trill is a single syllable that is just repeated over and over, and it could be continuous, as you can see there at the lower right, or it could be discrete. The trill syllable is a downward FM sweep. Just like before, the one previously was 5 milliseconds. This is 3.4, so it's a little bit shorter, but it's almost the same length. The trill phrase connects these, so there's no pause between them, so it's like FM, 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 FM right after another, not like in the chirp, which had pauses between each FM thing. Okay, and then that tends to go for about 25 milliseconds, so that means that if 25 divided by 3.4 would be 7, 8, 6, probably 6. You get around 6 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, perfect. So this is 6 of these in a row. So a trill thing is composed of 6 individual trill syllables. And then multiple trill phrases could occur in a row that are separated by a gap. So this is one trill phrase, that's a little gap. That's a trill phrase, that's a gap, and that's a trill phrase. So that gap is probably about 35 milliseconds. And that's just one of the trills. Let's listen again. And remember, that's slowed down by 8 times. And it's dropped down, I think, 8 octaves. So a lot. Okay, and then we have the buzz. Let's give it a listen. Okay, so that does sound similar to the trill, but it is different. So the buzz is a series of short downward FM syllables, 3 milliseconds, so it's very similar to what we saw before. But these are always discrete, never connected, and the trills we saw were often connected. They're separated by 4 milliseconds, so the ones previously were connected. There would be no pause between them, whereas there's little 4 millisecond gaps between each of these little things. Buzz phrases are a lot longer than trill phrases, so 35 syllables as opposed to 4 syllables. And the spectral structure of successive syllables in the buzz phrase follows a pattern, and you can see this here. It starts high and it drops down, and here at the bottom starting high and then dropping, but then staying stationary. So the opening syllables are higher at the beginning and end of the FM sweep. So remember, these are harmonics, so we can look at just this lower thing. This is higher and it gradually drops down. So the opening syllables start high and end high. The next 5 or 10 syllables gradually drop down to a low level at both beginning and end. And then all the remaining ones have the same sort of ending note, but the top note continues to shrink. So that's how you get, let's give it another listen. So you can see it changes over time, even though it's the same. It's a repeated syllable, but those changes are predictable and last a long time over the course of the whole buzz phrase. Buzz phrases are then often repeated and with about 40 milliseconds in between. Okay, and that's a whole buzz phrase, just one. Not all songs, I would like to point out, include all 3 types of phrase. The three types of phrase are the chirp, the trill, and the buzz. Chirps are always found, so all songs pretty much start with chirps, but you could omit the buzz or the trill. So this is the same screen we saw before, but let's just listen to this again, now that we just understand the syllables and phrase types a little bit more. So the first one. Okay, so the song type is that it's a chirp, trill, buzz, but then the variant aspect of it is like, oh, how many chirp phrases are there in here? It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. 4 chirp phrases, then 3 trill phrases, then 2 buzz phrases. We listen one more time. Okay, next bat. Okay, it sounded like about 5 chirp phrases, trill phrase, and 1 buzz phrase. but it's still that's the variant, but the song type is still the same thing. It's a chirp, trill, buzz. Okay, maybe 5, 6 or so chirps, 1 trill, 2 buzzes. Four chirps, 1 trill, 3 buzzes. But they're all the same song type, which is chirp, trill, buzz. We can first look at this comparison of the two different regions. The songs of the College Station bats were more likely to contain buzzes, and 80% of their songs had buzzes as opposed to only in Austin. So that is a regional difference, right? That's our East Coast versus West Coast, or Seattle versus Austin. Oh, yeah, Austin. Austin bats were more likely to sing songs composed only of chirps. So basically no one ever did that in College Station. Only 2% of songs were like that, whereas Austin bats sometimes just did a chirp song and that's it. But then in terms of the types, the one we were looking at before was chirp, trill, buzz. And the variants, number of chirps in the phrase, number of trills, and so on, there weren't differences between the regions. So now we can look within individual bats at the songs, or the variants versus types. So this definition, a song type is a particular sequence of phrases, ignoring the repetitions of the phrase. And so they recorded 412 songs altogether from these bats, and there were only 36 types. So that means they're repeating the same types over and over again. And the difference in types would be a chirp is a type, or a chirp buzz, or what we saw before is chirp, trill, buzz. Those are all different types. Okay, a song variant is the same sequence of phrases, but there could be a different number of repetitions per phrase. Of the 412 songs that they recorded, there's 87 different variants. So you can see, by having different variants, which just means different number of phrases, but in the same order, you create some variety. And then so if you sang chirp, buzz, that's a different variant from chirp, buzz, buzz, but that's the same song type. And then we saw examples where the song type chirp, trill, buzz could be chirp, trill, buzz, buzz, or chirp, trill, 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 buzz, right? Something like that. So those are all different variants of the same type. And then what they found, and this is a cool thing that's just a little hard to get your mind around, but it's interesting, is that there's more variation within individuals than across them. What this means is that all or most bats have many different song types and variants, and that these types and variants are all mostly the same among the different bats. So, to take our example of the Seattle bands, let's say you took bands in Seattle and Austin, Texas in the 90s. And let's say you do cover bands. So it kind of makes sense that a cover band in Seattle is going to have a lot of variations between all the different songs it plays in a set on a given night, and that the same thing would be the case in the Austin cover band. But that all the songs performed by the Seattle band might be mostly the same exact sort of songs as are in the Austin cover band. Or you could look at radio stations. Radio stations across the US play the same sorts of songs irrespective of where they are. But the songs on any given radio station might be pretty different from one another. So you'd say they have a common repertoire. And I hadn't thought of it until now, but it's kind of interesting to think of animal songs. Are these bats just like cover bands as opposed to original composers? Very interesting. And then finally, this important idea that the song construction is highly variable, can have lots of different types and variants, but it's not at all random. There's a rich syntax to how song types and variants are constructed. So we're going to look at this real quick and just review our ideas of zero order, first order, second order probabilities. So we have this transition diagram, finite state transition diagram on the right. Probabilities of the zeroth order. I know it's such a weird term, but that's okay. So for all the phrases of all the songs, let's say you just take all the phrases, you chop them up and you put them in a bucket. How likely is each phrase type? They're pretty, chirps are the most likely, buzzes are the least likely, but they're all around 30%. So yeah, that's the zero order probability. You can also kind of ask this question about at the start and at the end which sorts of thing is most likely. So zero order for first phrase and last phrase. The first phrase is nearly always a chirp, and the last phrase is nearly always a buzz. And you can see that in our diagram. So then we could talk about probabilities of the first order. How likely is each two-phrase combination? So after a chirp, you're most likely to go to a trill, but otherwise you might go to a buzz, or you could possibly just go straight to the end if you're in Austin, but not College Station. After a trill, you would usually trill again, but otherwise you might go back to a chirp, or you could go to a buzz, or you could just go directly to the end. After a buzz, you usually either buzz again or you end. Otherwise, you might actually go back from the buzz to the chirp. And then second order probability. So how likely is each three-phrase combination? So the way they did this, they compared it first to randomness, which is actually compared to like zero order. How like what are all the possible three-phrase combinations? And they're not including repeats. So if you go buzz, buzz, they're just ignoring the fact that you buzzed twice. And what they found is if bats were not thinking at all, we're not caring at all about the probabilities, then there'd be a random distribution. But it's not random. So there's some phrases, some three-phrase combinations that were much more common than expected. So to go chirp, trill, chirp, and it's expected based on what you have in the middle of this page, the probabilities of the first order. So after a trill, you usually go to after chirp, you usually go to trill, otherwise buzz. So if you take that into account and then you look at trill, chirp, trill, and then chirp again, you find that bats did that more often than they would be expected to, based on the first order probabilities. Okay, and then they also did chirp, trill, buzz much more commonly. That's the one we saw the examples of. They also did trill, chirp, buzz much more commonly than would be expected. So those are kind of like little, I don't know, types of song structure that are very common for these bats. And then there's certain other ones that are very possible, but they just didn't do often. They didn't very often go trill, buzz, trill, even though that should have been possible for them. They didn't often go buzz, trill, chirp, although that should have been possible for them, and so on. Those guys were all pretty rare. So it shows they really are organizing their song, first of all, at the zero order, which sounds they use, or which phrases they use. Second, at the first order, which is if they've done one phrase, which type of phrase they go to next. And they're even organizing their song at the second order, which is if they've done this one phrase and then this other one, what is the next most likely one? So if they're organizing them that way as singers, listeners are probably paying that kind of attention too. So that says this is a complex system of communication. We don't know what it means, but it's not randomness. So we could ask, is it music? And by the way, those guys are not, they're just cute little bats in diapers, I guess. So the song of the free-tailed bat has the following features. It's complex and it's variable. And its complexity and variability are not random. They follow certain probabilities of continuations. All individuals can themselves individually recombine elements, and that means they're creative. They can make new versions of songs. But interestingly, they tend to recombine those elements in the same ways, both within a regional culture, like Austin or College Station, and then even across cultures, like the types of, some things were different, like the Austin birds did just chirp songs. But then there's some things that are common, the way they are creative. So that's got to be partly in their genes. So there's like genetics of creativity, genetics of combining things in certain ways. It's a very interesting idea, like that, because you think of your genes as being determining what you do in some ways, but this is in a sense determining what kinds of freedom of choice you have in doing what you do. But then there's also limits to it at the same time. Anyway, pretty cool when we're talking about the biology of music, biology of creativity. So is this a song of the Brazilian free-tailed bat, song in quotes, is it more like music, or is it like speech, or is it like birdsong, or just like none of those things, something different? I think a really important question to ask is like, what do the different song types and variants mean to a listening bat? And this doesn't have to apply language. Like I use the term meaning, but what I really mean is it's a question of like, what sort of channel the song structure communicates to listeners on. So let's say you actually are listening to the radio and you hear something and you decide whether you want to listen to that song or you want to change the station. Then you can just and you decide, yeah, I want to listen to it. Like you could just think about what is it in me? Why am I choosing this particular song? Is it because I know it? Is it because it's upbeat? Blah, blah. There's different reasons. You just have different feelings. So that's the kind of channel I'm talking about. Like what sorts of feeling type buttons or thought type buttons does a certain song structure induce in the listener? So this wasn't investigated with the bat we were looking at, but it's investigated in a different type of bat, the greater white-lined bat, also called like a sack-winged bat, I think. And they found that the greater the complexity of the song of a given male meant that he would have more females roosting in his territory. And so if the females are roosting in his territory, it means that he's the most likely one to be breeding with them. So it seems that the females were preferring that male based on the complexity of the song. You don't know that for sure. They might like something else about him and that thing correlates with more complex song. But it seems probable that the complexity of the song sort of induces the females to like him a little bit more and want to be in his territory. So having a large and complex repertoire, at least for that kind of bat, therefore does seem to communicate something. But still, we don't really know what that something is. It could be a kind of arbitrary runaway beauty, sort of like what Robert Prum, what's his first name? Anyway, what Prum was saying about birds, and I hope you found that stuff pretty interesting. I found it super fascinating. Could be just arbitrary runaway beauty that just enters into the genes and then it just keeps going and getting more and more extreme. Or it could be some sort of an honest signal, like maybe complexity in your song signals a kind of intelligence. Maybe it signals you're better at fighting with others for your territory and defending your babies against predators. Maybe it says that you are better at, because of this, complexity of thought, you have better food acquisition skills, etc. So it could be an honest signal, or it really could be an arbitrary runaway signal that's just beauty for beauty's sake. You do get to go to sleep now. This is the end. Fall. Oh, wait, I didn't mean that. I meant wing. That's right. Thank you for tuning in to Bat Music.